The Seleucid Empire, what was it? Now, before the Seleucid Empire, Macedonian rule came upon places that were under the control of various satraps under the Persian Empire. So these were individual provinces with governors. Now, Alexander didn't do too much as far as administration. So he had to make sure that the power base was people that he felt like he can trust, and these would have to be hand-picked. Now, he might be out on an expedition, he might be out recruiting mercenaries, or doing something else. And then certain of people within what was once a province of Persia can determine upon themselves. And then, whether he agrees with this or not, you will finally have somebody in power in these provinces. Now, the Greeks were moving into these places, and they were taking, based upon a lot of different circumstances. If there was some rich noble, but this rich noble didn't fall into line, then they would remove him and take his land. And there's really no rules. Say that you took a city and you didn't have high moral standards where you were going to decide your course of action based upon principles that were heavily based upon what was right and what was wrong. Instead, you decide if you like somebody or not, and if you like this situation or not. So it's more like based upon how you personally feel about the situation. So once he leaves somebody in charge of a province, and you would think that Alexander would handpick these, or he would have his hand in this. If he didn't, he would have been too busy doing something else. But it's a part of ruling. You don't want to have a province under somebody that somebody else referenced to you, gave you a reference that this person should have control, and then you decide for yourself not knowing this person. Or you say, well, you can appoint the governors for me. It all ended up that the Hellenistic lifestyle came first over the Persian lifestyle. So it's kind of like if you had a monarchy, except in just this individual province, with the army garrison there keeping everything in line. Now, how much of an army did they have in this individual region? In every individual place that was a province, and how far did they keep the satrap way of government? So what they did is they had their Hellenistic people in this area, and they were to keep order. So they would be the nobles of this area. Now you had Persian nobles. If they were to fall into this, they had to join with them. They had to be people they could trust in order to keep their weapons. And their weapons would have to be completely under the control of this new Hellenistic power, which means that they know that these people are going to fight for them. They trust this person. So this would have to be somebody that they could trust in their own mind. All of the nobles, any Persian who had a great deal of land and could call themselves a noble, would have had to be considered an ally. Those that weren't, depending on the level of trust, would either be killed, could be used as a slave, or some other alternative based upon the relationship. So the Macedonians underneath Alexander. Now, he's gone, he's doing something else. So what's in charge underneath the governor that's left there? He starts to move things around the way he wants them to be. Because Alexander's gone, he's the one who's in charge. And of course, there's a certain sector that he cannot overstep outside of because there's still the rules, and he doesn't want to do something where he's going to be in trouble for. Now, how would you consider being in trouble when Alexander is the king? And, you know, to draw the attention to himself to be in that situation under these circumstances would require quite a bit of chaos and tumult. It would require quite a bit of noise to be made over his decisions. So, and those decisions would have to bother, of course, the leadership, being Alexander. So that's all there is really to the limitations of his power. So that gives him a lot of room. So what he can do based upon that is basically control this mini empire within the new Macedonian Empire. So whoever's in charge here would have to be extremely popular with the Macedonians that were with him. And Alexander probably didn't appoint too many people that weren't. But what he did was he did appoint people who actually were popular enough with the people that were there to be the governor that were not part of the original Macedonian civilization. So he did leave a lot of these places under the charge of who was in command before, because this became in his mind an ally. He still, of course, left Macedonians there, and what this would lead to would be based upon their relationship, the people that he left behind, with this ruler of that province. So there was a lot of popularity, being the popularity in everything, being the overruling force of action. Because you didn't have, this is like you didn't have a tradition. This is starting new traditions based upon what you like and what you dislike. Of course, this is all inspired by what has occurred before to the people who have control of the area, and they might learn something about what was there before and like that. The average citizens for a levy army, weapons were now kept in armories, because you didn't want the citizens to have their own weapons and armor, which before time they had. So you took their weapons away from them. And the reason that any certain province had any weapons in the hands of the citizens, these would have to be underneath a ruler who allowed this, and this would only be in those circumstances. But because of the situation, the average citizen didn't have his own weapons and armor, they were kept in armories. And then those levies would be used in the times that they were necessary, which at this point, because of the situation, it was not necessary. But when they were later on, they would go to the armories, and then they would arm these levies from that. So the control of the province was now an issue, because you always had different mentalities, of course, throughout history. And then you would have what popular groups arise within this. And these groups would be, we'll just say, left, right, and central to what this new Macedonian way of life meant. Because this was now what they were forced into. this new lifestyle. Now, some of these rulers wanted to make those citizens happier. Some of these rulers could care less. They didn't like the people that they were ruling, so they looked at them differently. Now, they started adding Hellenized culture buildings to these regions, and they felt like being in command, as creative as the individual would be, to change that region accordingly. And with this leadership being in the hand of Hellenistic peoples, you would have a lot of new Greek temples, you would have the destruction of old temples, you would have new buildings being built, gymnasiums being added, and a lot of times it would just be the Greeks showing off or the Macedonians showing off, because there were a lot of Macedonians and Greeks moving in here. Because, you know, the Macedonians didn't hate the Greeks. So they didn't say, well, we have to be careful of these lousy Greeks. They had actually bonded during these wars. So now, where you might have a division during those times, the guy you're fighting with, if he's a Greek and you're a Macedonian and you've been fighting this war, it's more like you are on the same side. And now the Persians, if they fold and now you're ruling now, since you didn't have them fighting with you at that point, you don't consider them like your brother of war, your brother in arms. Now, if somebody like the Parthians came in and you fought together, see, when you fight together, that causes a camaraderie. And that camaraderie between them can make them actually like brothers. You know, they drink together, they laugh about whatever topics that they find hysterical, funny, hilarious. But you know what ends up happening is there's the people pleasers and the ones that are self-indulgent, and those make a huge difference. So as this popularity contest expands, it starts to fall into different levels of content and discontent within their empire. After the death of Alexander with no clear heir, the peoples now are in a state of mystery. They don't know what's going to occur next. So quickly they're scrambling. And when they're scrambling in a power vacuum, people tend to act as quickly as possible once they have their decision of what they want to do. They're trying to gain some of this power, and they know they have to act quickly. So these are the type of situations that start to occur. So you start to have changes being made now just based upon individuals gaining more power. Because opportunities are now arising that weren't there. Now there's an opportunity. And another thing is, you are no longer secure being the governor of a province, because that can be taken away from you now. So first thing is, you have to know what's going on all around you. Now the generals of Macedonian soldiers, the generals of these different sectors within the Macedonian army, they have power because they control these troops, because the troops are now caught within that popularity contest. So a general who's extremely popular is extremely powerful at this point. So the successors of Alexander is a division into those who had enough popularity to have enough power to control different portions of this huge empire. So this is how the Seleucid Empire was formed because these different provinces were swallowed up by a man who was popular enough to have enough power. And also, you have to have luck involved, because it's kind of like, I'm getting it all as quickly as possible, kind of like an Easter egg hunt. You're grabbing them, and other people are grabbing them. So you can only get what you can get. It was founded by Seleucid, so it was named after him. What is this? A guy who was powerful enough based upon his popularity. Now, a crown within this area is Babylonia. Babylon especially. Babylonia was once itself a great empire. So now, to control Babylon. Now let's also take a look here at what is surrounding Babylon, because there's trade routes. Now you have Petra, and you have a lot of trade coming in and out through Egypt, and usually through Damascus, up into Turkey. You also have the Persian Oil Road, and you have a whole lot of established trade. Controlling that is something that they looked at, because now you don't probably look at, like I said, about trade before. I think this is just me talking to somebody, telling them about trade, because I don't think I mentioned it in any of my videos, but this was like, you have the mall, but I think you want to compare it maybe to the mall in the 80s, where it's a hangout. So you hang out at these places as well, and then travelers from all different civilizations that are involved in the coming and going of this place, they also bring with them a lot of information. So these also become more than just cities. These places, these establishments of great trade. Now there is a lot of desert around Babylon, and some of the places of travel rely heavily upon camels. So some journeys are extremely perilous. There were great trade civilizations that surrounded the area up and around the Sinai Peninsula and inward into the Mediterranean, up along the coast. So these are areas that were extremely important because of the trade routes, because of all the trade coming in, because you could trade with Egypt, and if you had a coastal city, you could trade with other cities that were located along the coast of further away civilizations. So you would have more trade coming in, and trade when you can have more objects from different civilizations, more type of resources coming through. It's kind of like if you had a shopping center that has more to offer. Your city has more to offer. You have more power this way. Say that you live in a city and you don't have apples, you don't have paper, you don't have video games. These are located in other civilizations. You don't have them. Now when you bring them in, imagine if you were a center that had all of this. You have big screen TVs. You have all the DVDs. You have all the cell phones. Nobody else has them. And you control all of this. Of course, no civilization controlled. There was no civilization with a monopoly on everything. But you did have civilizations, and you did have cities within those civilizations that were more adept at trade. The Nabateans, I hope I pronounced that correctly, because I'm cautious to use that, but they were great traders. And there's also Arabia, which was ruled by different tribes at this point, which didn't seem to like civilization too much. So these were a lot of raiders, considered bandits, and they were not easy to conquer, as Darius himself found out. They repelled, and threw back the invading Persian armies. I told you about Philip's battle skills as a general. I don't know what kind of success he could have had in moving his army into Arabia, but those armies, I'm sure, wouldn't have been as successful against the Macedonian army. I can almost guarantee that because of its form. But of course, I told you. So if you had horse archers, though, that's the biggest thorn in their side, and that would not be the case there. It's not like they're going up against somebody like the Parthians, who I mentioned. So let's go ahead now and let's get back to what I was talking about the governments, because this is a huge part of the Seleucid Empire, is these governments within the entire empire. Because the popularity contest, that's where the power shifts. So as time goes on, there's going to be others within this empire who gain power because of their popularity. So the popular guy with the army, if you're winning victories with an army, you're going to become popular to that army. And then their loyalties will easily shift to the general, because there really isn't a giant admiration for Seleucid land itself. There's just because there's not an idea that this is in your blood as a united people. There isn't that idea. So that means that the armies, their loyalties lie more to their generals. The Seleucid army used a lot of Persian weaponry, including those chariots with the blades coming out of the wheels, including their archers, and they tried to make use of everything. Okay, the horses that they were able to obtain, they were able to create cataphracts and very good cavalry, but the problem is they would think differently on how to use it. So instead of creating a giant armada of shot cavalry, of cataphracts, and what are cataphracts? They were what knights would be. These are knights. They're dressed in armor. The horses are dressed in armor. How do you defeat knights? Pikemen. Lots of pikemen. You know why knights were so successful? Because it's a cheat in war. Why? Because if you have the technology that they had at the time, it's a nightmare to have something that fast that can attack with that much force. Imagine getting hit with a shot cavalry. It doesn't matter. You're engaged with somebody else, you get hit, and what happens? Everybody flies into each other. And the amount of damage that in itself causes. Now, if you have enough heavy shot cavalry crashing into you, the amount that they're going to take from that, it is going to be such a force, running them over, crashing them into each other. They can't operate under those conditions. And that's why the Macedonian army was so successful. That's why they were able to. Darius was like, they're cheating, probably. This isn't how war goes, because nobody had ever done that before. To make such a giant, massive cavalry of heavy shot cavalry that could just cut through your forces, and then, hey, they're at the general already, threatening him. That's not how war was supposed to work. But they didn't do that until the Knights. And that's why the Knights were so successful. And they made a lot of pikemen. They didn't just have a few of them to counter Knights. So that's why they were able to counter Knights. Until they had gunpowder. Then it was like, a knight comes charging at you, he better reach you before you shoot him. Or the horse. before you shoot him or the horse. Now, they didn't have legions of cataphracts. In fact, cataphracts were basically Greek nobles or Persians that they allowed into their circle. So you have like these circles. So this sets you apart. And there's kind of like a snobby type of personality within this group. Like, this is us. So you start having these circles, and they set themselves apart because it used to be like the nobles were the ones who had the horses in the Greek army and in a lot of other places because they have a horse. So look at me, look at how cool I am. Because if you had a horse in Greece, you were the man. Like, look, I got a, oh yeah, look, that's like if you had a Nintendo with all the video games. No, let's just say that you had like an Xbox 360, but it was like 1982. That's how they looked at a guy with a horse. You would come over to somebody's place just to see their horse. And they were hurting that horse because they didn't even know how to ride the damn thing. They were choking it. That's the way that they were actually. They didn't actually know how to ride a horse. They were just on the damn thing. Like, look what I've got. I don't know how to use it, but got it. They weren't the great horse civilization. They weren't like the Mongolians who were figuring out how to even stand on a moving horse. You would say to yourself, how in the world do you do that? Trust me, at this point in time, they were doing some really crazy stuff with horses. So let's go north of the Black Sea to a certain point. Once you get past the civilizations that are, that's still, I mean, once you get past where people still fell within the realm of a civilization to where you come to the nomadic tribes, and then you come to them, they were already doing some crazy stuff with horses. So these guys, I mean, because you want to show off. So the guy can already shoot a bow behind him while driving forward on his horse. So what can beat that? What if I could stand up on a moving horse? Think about how difficult that would be. Now, what if I could dismount and mount a horse in the quickest time? What if I can go from one horse to the other, mounting and dismounting? Now, standing upon a moving horse, how realistic is that? But I can pretty much guarantee you that there were people who were actually able to do that, and I'm pretty sure the next thing they wanted to be able to do was to stand on a moving horse while shooting a bow. Of course, not during any real combat, but if you saw somebody doing that, that would be like the craziest thing you've seen in your life. And there's people who can do that on elephants, even to this day. There's people who can stand on the back of an elephant and shoot a bow. On a horse, that's a different story. But there are people, I'm sure, who tried this, and I'm sure there are people who attempted to a certain extent, and probably succeeded to a certain extent. But I'm just telling you, these guys were doing some crazy stuff with horses. To show you some, and just the fact that they could shoot a bow behind them. And there was actually horses that can charge into you from the front. They had a weapon like a lance to charge into you. And then once they were past you, they would switch weapons and shoot a bow into you. Because they would actually have the lance connected to the horse so that it wouldn't fall. So that when they release the lance, then they grab their bow and they shoot behind them. So they could attack you with a head-on charge. And then when they're leaving you, they can shoot arrows at you. So these guys also set the stage for knights because they started to armor these horses. They started to do the craziest stuff you could possibly do. Let's just get a whole bunch of weapons, put them on horses. Let's get all this armor on the horse. Let's add horns to the horse. Let's make the horse look like somebody's worst nightmare, like a monster coming to drink their blood. Let's have plumes coming off of our head and off of the horse. And also with people being influenced like the domino effect all the way into China and then going out towards the West. So you had a lot of different ideas being slowly pushed over towards that region. So you had some decorations of all different types of things that you can comprehend within your mind. They didn't stop because this is the rules and this is what we can have and this is how this is supposed to look. There wasn't that. Let's just try and do whatever we can, you know? Let's get as crazy as possible. So once you're able to do a lot of wild things with your horse, you start these raiding parties. And these would go into the Seleucid region, the Seleucid Empire, and make raids, because who better to go and steal from than some rich civilization? One that actually, they don't give a damn about this civilization. I mean, they don't like them at all. So you got a lot of raids going on. And some of them were probably just laughing their asses off, like the ones over by India. They would come out of the hills, and there was really nothing to stop them, because the Seleucid Empire was spread so thin, and they started having revolts within their cities, and they have to go quell this revolt. They have to move the army over here. They have to move over there, and they were also using Indian elephants. And if you have horse archers and you can avoid those elephants, imagine how well you can fare against them. The worst nightmare for elephants, though, the worst thing for elephants is artillery, especially if you have explosive artillery. Forget it. So if you want to know how are you going to destroy elephants, hit them with the artillery. Hit them with archers, hit them with stuff that you can attack from a far distance away. And artillery is the best. It'll drive those elephants completely crazy if they're being attacked by explosive artillery. Drive those elephants into their own line. So try new things for warfare. If you can become successful with something different, people are going to try that. Because right now, you're not trying to build a civilization in a lot of places. So you're not sticking to any certain rule structure and traditions. Right now is a time when the world is moving in all sorts of different directions. And in the Seleucid Empire, this is no different. You kind of have a guy trying to keep plugging all these holes that keep appearing. And you just don't have the manpower because you don't want to have all these citizens with weapons, because you don't have an established blood-related peoples going, oh, we're all, no, this is for, like, this isn't like where they're to be united, like, you know, Greece against the Persians. Well,
they weren't
even completely united against the Persians. You know, like, well, we're all Egyptians, we're all part of this civilization of Assyria, or we're all part of the civilization of Macedon, or we're all part of the Roman civilization. And that's why the Romans actually, because all these ones, they didn't even have that, you know? There was a lot of people who didn't fall in love with what they were a part of, like the Romans did. They were the civilization where the people within that civilization, I mean, they were passionate about just being Roman. So you didn't have that here. So if they're the popular governor and he has enough pull and he feels like he has enough power and he's revolting and he's taking control of this area, you have to remember, this is like you went to the pet store and you encaged a whole bunch of pets. And now they want to break out of that cage any chance they get. It's like a cat trying to break through the screen window to get outside. Because there's a lot of people in this empire that want out. So there's so many different things going on underneath different commanders. And then you have whoever the ruler of this empire is at that point in time that he's the ruler. And he has to take care of not only of plugging up all those holes, but he has to deal with the wars that are going on between them and the Ptolemaic Empire. The Ptolemaic Empire, under Ptolemaic Empire. So if you have these giant wars going on, and then you also have to deal with within your own empire, and then you have to deal with these raids going on, that is just pulling you all over the place, because You have one guy who wants to be in control of as much of the action as possible, but it's like he turns his back and something else is happening. So it's kind of like you plug up all the holes at some certain point. Yeah, we got him on now. And how long is that going to last? The water just bursts through again. So there's a lot of weaknesses in this civilization, Seleucid Empire. If you can even consider it a civilization, what's civil mean? Because it means different things, but if you were to say they're civilized, they're all civilized, well, you actually have, I'm sure, a whole lot of different civilizations within this empire, if you were to say that. If you were to say as a civil structure, well, that would be each province, and that would be based upon now the commander of the Seleucid Empire, whatever rules that he puts forth, and then how those governors enforce those rules underneath them. They have almost like a volcanic eruption that they're trying to keep from occurring with all the people that are underneath them, because after a while, a lot of them, they don't want to be part of this thing. And they have better ideas than the ones that are happening here. So one of the biggest enemies of the Seleucid Empire early on was the Ptolemy, I hope I say it right, because people complain these days. People complain anytime you say any word wrong. If somebody pronounced my name wrong, I wouldn't care, but that's how people are. And it's weird because now, this is still part of world history. So people doing that, that's actually part of world history, what's going on now. 300 years from now, you look back, people were complaining on the internet about mispronunciations even, for some language that someone invented at some certain point in history, and people wanted to be completely precise. Now, when the person created that language, did he want people to pronounce every word completely precise? Did he even care? Was there a certain rule stream? No, you have to pronounce it properly. This all was actually something that was part of the mindset of the English Empire. So, you know, the British, this mentality that they had, this all is drawn from that, because they're the ones who really push that out, you know, this type of thinking, this way of thinking, to be very precise. Now this is what separates us from everyone else, and to look down on other people. That's why they treated the Indians from India, whatever you call them, since you call somebody else Indians, well, those in India, that's why they treated them like garbage. That's why they treated the people in their African colonies like garbage that weren't English. So obviously that way of thinking is wrong. But let's get away from that now. Let's get back to the Seleucid Empire. You had people within the Seleucid Empire who looked down upon the Persians. And if somebody's looking down upon you, they're looking to cut you out, to go from being underneath you to being either an equal or looking down on you. So there was a lot of mistreating people going on, and if somebody rebelled, you would deal very harshly with those involved, of course, trying to send messages, especially when they keep, you know, oh, the water is spraying through another leak. And, well, we got to deal harshly with these people so that this doesn't occur again. And you're getting sick of it. It's hard to be a ruler sometimes. You know, he's probably drinking and telling a story. It's hard to be a ruler sometimes. I gotta do this.
And you got them over there every time I turn my back.
So this empire was very difficult to rule. You had to do a lot of moving around. If you go into certain areas like Bactria, you have these trade centers, and they may be distracted just by what they're doing to get involved in all this. Big problem came when the Seleucid Empire decided that those in Judea, they could no longer practice their religious practices, which caused huge revolts, because they were allowed to have their religious lifestyle underneath the Ptolemaic rule. So that changed.